welcome to your day off. My name is Corey, and of course I'm sitting with my best bud, Tone. What's up, Tone?
Hey, what's up, brother? Hey, this is today is a day where we start getting into into other areas of our industry that we haven't really gotten into yet.
And I'm pretty excited. We today our guest is Matty Conrad. The Matty Conrad story is we've been beating him up for about 4 months to get on the podcast. So today's the day that we finally get to talk to him.
The art of handsome. I love that.
Yeah. Right? I know, right? Yeah, I mean, we were just right before we got on air. I was telling Matty that we are definitely more committed to talking to barbers this year. I mean, to be honest, it's just kind of new to me because until we started the podcast, until we launched the podcast, I wasn't.
If anybody saw you, definitely haven't seen a barber in a while.
I know, it's terrible. It's really bad today. But yeah, I mean, like when we started the podcast, it really opened my eyes. Like, oh my gosh, there's a whole world here. There's a whole generation here. And like, not that I didn't see it before, but just doing the podcast,
outside of the Rusels, we haven't really talked to anybody in the barbering field, right?
We haven't talked to anybody outside except for the Rusels,
Yeah.
So,
and barbering is so strong right now. I mean, if you're on Instagram, I mean, you just see it. I mean, it is strong.
It's strong. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's not just, I guess we can talk about it with Matty a little bit, but it's not like barbering isn't just barbering, right? Like you have like foundation type styles like that the rules will show. And then, you have some stuff like our friend Johnny Cash up in Pennsylvania that he won the License to Create award for the hair tattoo. So you're seeing a lot of that, which is pretty neat. It's like, again, we were talking before, like where barbering was just like, where you went to take your kids and it's a whole different like thing now. It's a whole different art now. It's a whole different, and I'm probably being dumb because I know if Rob was on the podcast, he'd be yelling at me like, it never went anywhere. Right. He's freaking at me or whatever. But again, from my eyes, it's just, it's
social media, right? It's just another avenue that what people are doing out there, we can see actually because of social media.
Absolutely.
So let's get into it.
You think they're tired of hearing about us?
Yeah, I'm definitely. I want to hear more about Matt.
Yeah,
so
forget about us.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Matty Conrad from Victory Barbers and Brand. I think I got it.
Right. There you got it. Nailed it.
Hey, welcome to your day off, bud.
Thanks so much, you guys. How you doing today?
Amazing.
Awesome, brother. Awesome.
Thanks a lot for having me. I've been watching you guys for a while. It's really exciting to get a chance to come on here and hang out with you guys. So thanks a lot for being so patient. I'm sorry it took so long.
No worries, man. It happens when it happens. It happens when it's supposed to.
Yeah. So before we get into all the great stuff you're into right now, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Oh man. Okay, I am from a small town you've never heard of. It's called Victoria, British Columbia. It's in the extreme west coast of Canada. It is the most beautiful part of Canada. It's an amazing place to grow up. It's a town of about 300,000 people, so it's not huge. It's a ferry ride or a plane ride away from Vancouver, which is where I spend a lot of my time now. I still live in Victoria. I still live here. I've got a house and I live in the community I grew up in. I spend a lot of time on the road now as well. So not as much as I'd like, but I do love it here.
Is that where all your family's still?
Yeah. My mom and dad live here. My sister and her family, my brother and his wife, everybody lives here. I've got family over in the UK and down in Australia and stuff too, more extended family. But we all grew up here and none of us really left, which is weird for a city like Victoria because it's a town where there's a big university. A lot of people come. They love living here, but there's not a lot of job opportunities. So usually what happens is people will do their, it's a nice place to be from. Right. So you grow up, you do school, you maybe work your jobs in the service industry, but then when you want to get a career, you have to move away. And I never did that. I managed to make a career of what I love doing right here. And I got to build something inside the community that I grew up in that is part of the community now. It's part of the fabric of the city that we live in. And I really love that.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
That is super cool.
It's like mesh. Like he's meshed himself into the community,
You force it. I'm not leaving. You can't get rid of me.
Matt, it's time for you to go.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So where'd your hair journey begin?
This is funny. I was one of those kids growing up in school. Like my mom cut my hair. All right. I could show you some haircuts that would just turn your face white. It's she was not a talented woman when it came to the hair arts. She just had a pair of scissors that had a ring thing on them. And she felt that made her qualified to cut another human's hair.
I know the pain.
Yeah. You know those weird little bowl cuts he used to have. I remember the first time my mom actually remember picture day, you know, when that was the day that your parents, you know, as if you're a parent and you have kids, picture day is not just another day of the school year. That's the day to show all the other parents that you got your shit together. My mom didn't really subscribe to that, but I remember one time she tried to give me what she called a proper gentleman's haircut, where, you know, I didn't know anything, but I knew that Grandpa was a proper gentleman, you know, and Superman was a proper gentleman, you know, like always that cool side part and stuff. So that's kind of what I had in mind. And instead, what she did was she put that bowl back on my hair and cut the haircut she knew how to do. And then she pulled my ear out of the way and cut a hole around the ear. And when she put the ear back, she just started laughing, like that kind of laugh that you do where you're trying not to laugh, but you can't help but laugh, kind of like you're doing right now. And and I remember the look on her face was just like, well, that didn't work. And I just had this bowl cut with one hole in one side and like left long over the ear on the other side. And she just sent me to school on picture day like that. She's like, well, it's not going to work out.
Matty, do you still have that picture?
Oh yeah, I got it. You want to see it?
No, bro. Here's it. Yeah,
I'll email
tag me in it. And then when we release the podcast, we're putting that up.
Oh, it is honestly great. Like, I think it's the one moment in my life I can pinpoint. Like at the time, it didn't really, like, I was a kid. What do you know? It was that period where your adult teeth were growing in, you know? So like I got chiclets in my mouth that are like strangers at a party. They're not all together, you know, they're in the same place, but they're not hanging out.
Right.
And so it was a little awkward. And I kind of grew up with parents that were like really style deficit, you know? So I didn't have this innate sense of style or even really understood what that was about. You know, my older brother is 9 years older than me. And so my hand-me-down situation was brutal when I was a kid. Like, I was going to school in the 80s and I looked like I'd just gotten off the Partridge Family bus in the 60s. You know? So
I think that's going to be the title of our podcast, Style Deficit, with his picture. I love it.
Yeah, welcome to it. And so, I mean, I'm the most unlikely hero of this kind of thing, you know, like the fact that I'm doing what I do now is kind of a miracle because I was not set up for that as a kid. I was actually one of those marginalized kids, you know, like I was kind of awkward style. I came from a family that didn't really put any importance on that or really like much importance on socialization and stuff. So when I was in school, I was a little awkward and kind of quiet and weird. I got bullied a lot. I moved schools and stuff a couple of times. And what's really funny about that is when you are a marginalized kid, all right, like you put way too high a priority on the idea of being popular or being liked or being accepted by the popular kids. Now, the funny thing about it is if you really break it down and look at the popular kids, they're the most extraordinarily mediocre group of people.
They're working in your warehouse right now, right?
Yeah, they're the ones that are yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're still working at that restaurant job and they're 45. So the thing about it is they were doing that thing and it's like you're trying to be mediocre. The exceptional kids don't get celebrated, you know what I mean? The artistic and, you know, enthusiasts are different. The kids that are different. All the people that kind of make up the hairdressing industry, they're not like a bunch of the popular kids. They're all the weird kids, all the weird ones that are real artistic and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like that's a relatable thing for most of us. And I love that. So when I first started hearing about like the hairdressing thing, like that never even registered for me. I never thought I would go into hairdressing. I actually took in my grade 12 year, I took like 4 blocks of mechanics of like auto shop. In grade 12 year, I thought I was going to be a mechanic. So I went to work after school. I went to work in a garage and in about 3 months realized that I hated that. Like I hated the work. I hated working. I didn't like the people I was working with. It was not my vibe. So from there, I got a job at a restaurant. And at night, the place where this restaurant was situated, I was just washing dishes in the back, man. And all these hairdressers would come and sit at the bar after work because that's what hairdressers do. They get off work and they go have drinks. And man, they were cool. They were so cool. They had style and they just had so much life in them. You know what I mean? Like I had a crush on every single girl because I was like, and all the guys had cool hair and they just had cool clothes and everything about these people was attractive. You know what I mean? Everything about them was inspiring to a style deficit 18-year-old kid.
Did you see them as like the popular kids? So was it intimidating when you first met them, or?
I didn't. Yeah. Oh, intimidating. Sure. Like you're impressed by them. Like, but they're not intimidating in the way that like hairdressers are very warm people. They're very inclusive, and they're very like, they're not people that are like the cool kids you can't sit with us. They're the ones that want to strike up a conversation with you, and they're great communicators, and they make you feel included. And I think that's what's so cool about hairdressing as an industry. You know what I mean? We've honed our social skills to understand how important it is to make people feel welcome, but to make people feel included, and the way that we care for people. We're an industry of people that care for other people. And so that's just part of it, you know? And so when we did that, I remember looking at these people and thinking to myself, like as a style deficit 18-year-old, I want to go to hair school so I can be just like them. It had nothing to do with like a sense of style or art or creativity or anything. All the things that you should go to hair school for. I went for the worst possible reason, to meet girls.
I mean,
basically, yeah, to meet girls, to try and be cool, to get some sort of sense of style. And it didn't come in hair school at all. Like it was a real battle. I really had an uphill battle learning to not just to trust myself, like massively insecure and very frightened of my own creative ideas. It was really about attaching myself to some of the things that I really loved about hairdressing, which was maybe the client interaction. I loved the people part. I loved caring for the people sitting in my chair. I love that way that you make them feel, the way that when they look at themselves, when you're done, they see something different. They see something more beautiful about themselves. That's an impossible thing to not love. I like working with my hands. I really like the practical application of things. And I started to realize that I really love the idea of the technical cutting, especially because it spoke to my like nerdy kind of nature that I have for work. And I really loved that part. And so some of the things I had to battle to learn a little bit more about styling or being more creative with maybe sometimes less creative with styling, I think making things commercial looking and stuff. It's easy to take some stuff and make it just into a living sculpture, but doing something that really makes someone feel pretty. And so, yeah, I got into hair school that way.
Was it a barbering school or?
It was, no, interestingly enough, in Canada, there was no options for that. This is 1994, 95. There was no options left for barbering schools. I didn't have an option for that. And at the time, that industry wasn't exciting. It was like it felt like old guys that were chained to a chair waiting to die. And most people that were going to a barbershop at that point, when you ask a guy where he goes to get his haircut and he says, I just go to the barbershop, it's like he was apologizing for being cheap. You know what I mean? And it didn't seem like a fashion forward industry at the time. And so it didn't hold a lot of appeal for me, and it wasn't a thing where I was like, I didn't know enough about it at the time, but it wasn't like, I want to get into that.
I guess, yeah, because I guess back then you didn't really see that many female barbers either. So if you're going to hair school to meet all the women, it makes sense that you would go to
I'll just go right.
The funny, I'm sure that's the reason I at 18, I'm sure that was a part of the reason why I went, but I quickly realized that is maybe the worst plan ever. All of the mystery is ruined. All of it. It's like gone.
It's totally gone. That story's definitely come up, especially for straight hairdressers that came up in the 80s and the early 90s. Like that seems to be kind of like the common story, about why they started hairdressing. I mean, this is certainly not the first time that we've heard it. It's really funny. A lot of people ask if I had seen the movie Shampoo, yes. And I still haven't seen it. I have never seen that movie. So right. I understand what it's about, but I'm like, I haven't seen it. I still haven't. So you graduated in like 94 from hair school? Yeah, 94, 95. Yeah. Right. And then you started working in a salon? Yeah, I was really full of chutzpah back then. You know what I did? One of the girls who was going to my school, who's taking the makeup program, was really good at doing makeup on herself and had this really interesting and weird hairstyle that she asked. I didn't cut, but she asked me to trim it up one time, and I did. 3 weeks later, somebody saw her, or 2 weeks later, whatever, somebody saw her and took pictures of her, and it ended up on the cover of this local magazine. And so me, with all of my vibrato, grabbed this magazine and walked into a hair salon by my house, and I said, I did this. Will you give me a job? And they said, okay. So ridiculous as it was, I just kind of stormed down the door of this hair salon and I worked my ass off in this place. And what was funny about it
And I'm not sure how this translates to people these days, but I had no idea what I was doing. Getting out of hair school, 9 months in hair school. I know a lot of people that walk out feeling like, oh yeah, I can tackle this. I got this all on lockdown. I didn't know anything. If I look back at it now, I didn't know what I was doing. And it was like a miracle that I graduated. So it's just so funny to look back on those days and to think of some of those clients that stuck around as long as they did and realize that what a proving ground it is in the first little bit. And I remember I talk in classes about this too. And one of the things that maybe we could talk about a little bit that I think is funny is that there is this feeling that you get when you first start this thing. And the reason why you get this feeling is because of your first client that sits in your chair. The very first client that ever sits down in your chair, they sit down and it all goes something like this. You're going through the consultation, you see their lips moving, and all you really hear in your head is, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. And then once they've stopped talking, you start doing what you know how to do already with a slight modification that you feel like makes it kind of fall in line for what they asked for. Okay, and then halfway through the service, they all, for some reason, know to ask one simple but completely terrifying question. How long have you been doing this? Like, they're like bees and dogs. They smell fear. Every single first client knows to ask, how long have you been doing this? And in that moment, every person that's listening to this podcast that had that happen, every person that's been a hairdresser their whole life, we all did the exact same thing. We lied.
We lied.
We lied to people. We told them 9.5 months. Like, we include the day we registered for hair school as part of our education, our experience level. We lie to these people. And it's with good intentions. We lie to them because we're afraid that they're going to freak out if they find out, well, actually, you're my first client. This is my first day. And because, like, we're afraid they're going to freak out. But the problem with it is in that very moment, every hairdresser that's ever started this has become a fraud. You've become a fraud in that moment. And there's a reason why people are afraid of themselves for the first couple of years of this, or doubt themselves, or don't feel maybe as actually confident as they should. Because if you're promoting yourself really hard without actual confidence, the problem is that's just all ego and arrogance. That's the only thing that will come out is ego and arrogance, which is misplaced. But if you're actually confident, you actually learn, you actually press yourself forward, you're able to slowly erode that feeling of fraud. And that's why education is so important in what we do. That education kills fear, not knowledge. Knowledge kills fear. The more you know, the less you're afraid. But that's one of the things that was so funny is that's something I took really away from my first years as a hairstylist, was just understanding, I think, how insecure I was about my own work, and how much doubt I had in myself, and how hard it was to get over that feeling of fraud, until I realized that education was such an important part of that, which is why I'm so determined to educate people to be less afraid these days. That's really the approach that I take with my education. Is I'm not trying to impress you. I'm trying to help you be less afraid. I'd rather leave someone inspired than impressed, which is my motto for education. And to help people past that point has become a huge part of what I do now.
I love that. I'm gonna write that down.
And that's amazing. I mean, and what a shift, right? Like, what a shift when you're teaching a class that, I'm here to remove fears. I mean, that's the most debilitating thing that the human experience is about.
Well, I feel like it holds a lot of people back, and I've been in education now for 12 or 13 years. So more than almost half my career, I've been doing education. First in taking it, and now in teaching it. And I've worked with a lot of different people, and I've seen a lot of different education. I've seen a lot of different people that call themselves educators out there, but I always gauge somebody's class or somebody's performance by, if I didn't know what this person was talking about, would I be more afraid of cutting hair going back, or would I be less afraid? And I think that's a big thing, because a lot of people like to get up and show you how much they know, which, if anything, only shows the people in the audience how little they know and makes them more afraid to cut hair. And I think that that's a big problem, and educators need to look at that and think, like, am I empowering these people to go back and do better, and to feel better, and to feel more enthusiastic, or am I making them more afraid of what they don't know?
That is so empowering.
I know. I'm sitting here, dude. You're inspiring me
completely. It actually kind of reminds me. I mean,
that's a T-shirt, though. Rather to inspire than to impress.
I love that. That's definitely a T-shirt. Matty, like Tony and I were fortunate enough to be in LA back in was it November, December? November is November.
Yeah, November 4th.
It was the Salon Digital Summit, and we actually took a class with OMG Artistry, Olivia Small.
Oh man, Olivia is a really good friend of mine. She is an absolute doll.
She's an absolute doll.
Love her.
And the way that she taught her class was exactly what you were saying. Like, you left that class so empowered. Like, I'm a terrible note writer because I never know what to write down. You know, like if I'm sitting in a lecture, I'm like, what's important, what's not important. You know, I'm always.
It's okay though, because you got him. I mean, I haven't seen him put his pen down yet.
Exactly.
I mean, you're fine. Yeah, thank you, brother.
But in Olivia's class, it was like I couldn't keep up. She was just giving bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb, and you have to leave that class feeling empowered. You have to leave that class knowing exactly what to do, and that's exactly how she taught it. I called her afterwards, and we talked a little bit after the class, and I said, you know, that was like a 4-hour YouTube tutorial. Yeah. Like all the BS was gone. It was about like, here's how you do this image. You position them like this. These are your settings. If it's daylight, this is your setting. If it's a ring light, this is your setting. This is how you set up the ring light. There was no like BS about it. It was like exactly how you do it. So anyone that's listening, if you get a chance to do Olivia's social media class, 100% do it.
Oh, yeah, I recommend it too.
It's amazing. And what I'm hearing from Matty, if you get a chance to take any of his classes, 100% do it, because you know, he's teaching it as a tutorial. All the BS is gone. It's about you, not him.
Well, I'm working on a lot of that right now in myself. That was just a thing that I learned very quickly on, that I think is the most authentic to who I am. You know what I mean? And I think that's really important when you're in front of a group of people, or whether you're just with 2 or 3 people. It's just always important to be whoever you are at any given moment, and make sure that what you're sharing is honest and true to who you are. You know, not everybody's going to feel that, but I get asked by so many people these days, man. I honestly, for the first part of my barbering career, the most common question was, what clippers do you like? But now they're like, how can I be an educator? Because people see me flying all over the world, and they see me hanging out with all these other famous barbers that they know. The funny thing is, I freak out about that every time, because I'm not like, I don't think of myself as one of those barbers. I think they're all those barbers, and when I hang out with them, I'm like a little giddy. But it's really weird when people ask, like, how do you get to be an educator? I always feel like, okay, are you asking about how to be an educator or how to be a rock star? Because I think the two look similar, but they're real different. And go ahead, man. Sorry, you look like you.
No, yeah. So before we move further into this barbering and education,
don't let me jump ahead too far.
No, yeah, so we're in a salon right now.
Yeah.
You know, you just fought your way into the salon by this magazine picture cover.
So,
crowbar.
Yeah. So
I did a crowbar. That was the biggest power move I think I've ever pulled in my life.
But what's the story from there to entering, becoming a barber?
Okay, so like I said, I started taking a lot of education. All right, I took a lot of classes. I worked with a number of really great education-based companies, taking education and teaching regionally for companies like TG early on, companies like Bumble and Bumble. These were great companies. They're amazing and really well known for having excellent education. You know what I mean? And eventually, what happened was I had opened a small hair salon with a friend of mine. It was really, really cool. And this guy came through the door. He was the president of Schwarzkopf Professional, and he took one look at me and he's like, I want you to come up to Toronto and I want you to audition for our team. And that had never even like hit my radar before that. I was like, this is crazy. So I got into education that way. I came out to Toronto. I stepped into a room full of people that knew intimately how to cut incredible haircuts. I didn't. I came up with that whole kind of cut with your feelings mentality, but I love technical haircutting. Like I love it. I just didn't know it very well. And there's a lady named Kathy Simon who is, if you've never heard of her, is pound for pound one of the best hair cutters in North America, for sure. And she took one look at me and she said, "You don't know what you're doing." Yeah, and at this point I was like, you're right. And she said, "That's the right answer." And I said, "Okay, you want to show me?" And she's like, yeah, I do. And so this lady taught me how to understand hair in a way that I never had understood it. I taught me to fear nothing. Taught me to really she didn't teach me a couple of haircuts. She taught me to cut hair. And that's another thing that I really try to approach in my classes now that I've learned from her, is it's so much more important to teach people to cut hair than it is to teach them 2 haircuts. And so it's really, really the way I like to approach things. It changed my life. It made me much more confident what I was doing. And it took that fear away. I could tackle anything that hit my chair. The unfortunate thing about it is that for every Kathy Simon out there that is an amazing technical haircutter who yearns for people to grow technically and be strong artists, there is 500 other hairstylists who are more concerned with wearing glittery outfits, fireworks, pumping techno music, and doing something showy but kind of ridiculous on stage. And I realized the more I was out doing education, the less education I got to give, and the more of a show was expected. And it started to break my heart in a weird way. Like, how many times you go to a hair show and walk away being like, well, that was really exciting and cool, but I don't know if I learned a single thing. And I realized what really connected with me wasn't the rock star. It wasn't the stage. It wasn't the glittery show of it all. It was the education. I would rather be in front of 2 people teaching them haircuts than in front of 2,000 people putting on a show and teaching nothing. And I got really good. One of the things that's interesting about working with companies and doing education, and it's just something I want everyone to think about for themselves out there, and maybe understand that our industry is primarily not creative. That's the funny thing about it. Our industry is primarily not creative. It's recreative. The interesting thing that most of us do as artists, we don't understand how to access our own artistry. What we do is we borrow from other people's. We're taught collections of haircuts. We're taught trendy haircuts. We're taught all these things that we are then taught to recreate with an incredible sense of, sometimes with an incredible sense of skill. But the problem with it is if you ever really have to come up with something that is completely unique by yourself out of nowhere, you realize the limits to your own creativity, because we are taught through education, through classes, through almost everything about our industry, how to be recreative. And there's a few creative people that do these really amazing, unique looking things that nobody's ever seen before. And you think to yourself, wow, they're incredible. How can I do that? And then we copy them, and we make our own style out of bits and pieces of other people's. And I learned that really early on, that I was excellent at recreating haircuts. I was excellent at teaching on stage and could recreate almost anything that you showed me. I was a very proficient haircutter. But I didn't feel one bit creative. As soon as somebody gave me 10 minutes to look and go like, you need to do something different, do something creative and wild, I would just kind of like freak out a bit. You know what I mean? Inside, not outside. I could, when you're on stage, you're always holding it together. You're like, no problem, I got this. But really inside, you're like, holy shit! It was a thing that was really sobering for me. And I realized, okay, cool. I'm not great at being creative, and maybe that's something I need to work on. And I started to learn a little bit more about how to do that. But with the overall show of things, I fell out of love with it, to be honest.
So how did you challenge yourself to become more creative? I mean, that it sounds so easy, it's easy to say, it's easy to say that I'm going to be more creative, but I mean, what was that discipline like? If you want a really good exercise, here's one. Think of the thing that makes you uncomfortable to tell other people that you like as much as you do. Like, what are you super nerdy about that you're like, okay, I'm kind of obsessed with this. Remember that word we're talking? I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with this. Like, what are you kind of obsessed with? And think about, like, what are those things that you don't want to tell people you like as much as you do because you don't think that you think they'd think you were weird. You know what I mean? Like, I'll tell you what mine is, and it relates to tons, and it'll make perfect sense to you. I don't know why, but my whole life I have been obsessed with World War II. Almost everything about it, like the style of the time, the whole history of the military and that thing, the history of the time, how it all came down, I don't in any way glorify it. I think it was one of the worst things that's ever happened in history, but at the same time, I'm fascinated by it. I watch all the documentaries. I've seen all of the movies. I have gone to tons of museums. Like I'm drawn to this stuff inexplicably in a way that other people would think I'm super weird. And I realized very quickly on that little thing is probably the most authentic thing you are. It's probably the most authentic thing about you. It's the thing that you don't do because it's cool. You don't do because it's interesting or popular to other people. It's just a thing that you're almost embarrassed by, but is undeniable. And that is probably the most authentic person you are. And when I started really looking at things through that,
I started to realize that a lot of the things that really appealed to me had that sensibility from that era, that time when I started doing barbering. I mean, way before those haircuts were being seen on the street, I was doing those haircuts and I was entering them into hairdressing competitions, and the hairdressers didn't get it. They were like, why did you enter a bunch of haircuts that look like your grandpa? Because everybody that was winning these awards were guys that had a grown up Justin Bieber haircut with eyeliner and a whole bunch of scarves on. You know what I mean? And they were looking at my stuff like, that's weird. And I was like, okay, it's weird, sure, but I dig it. I think it's cool. And that, it was empowering, because even though you were going against the grain and doing something weird and people didn't get it, I got it. And it was the most satisfying thing I had ever done to that point. No matter how good I got at recreating somebody else's thing, the things that I was creating for myself that other people thought was weird were so satisfying in a completely different way, you know? And I connected with my own work in a way that I never had before. And it was just, yeah, it's hard to explain, but there's just a feeling that you get where you're just like, well, this is me.
That's amazing. That's amazingly inspiring.
Well, it rained. I mean, it inspired you so much at a point to where you became last year the Canadian hairstylist of the year, correct?
Canadian Barber of the Year. Yeah, I had one. Wow, that was actually that sounds so weird.
Right.
I don't. I'm deeply proud of that. I don't know if that's a quantifiable thing, but I really appreciate the votes that I got for that. I won Canadian Men's Hairdresser of the Year for the first time in 2014, and I had won that award twice, 2 years back to back, and then I had won a couple of the BTC Big Shot. I've been a finalist in Nahas. At that time, hairdressing, because we didn't have Instagram as popular as it is now, hairdressing was very much about the awards. It was about the magazines, and to get yourself noticed or to get your work out there, you had to compete. You had to do those things. You had to get images in there. So back when I was hairdressing in a salon, I learned to take photographs, and that was a really important part of my journey is learning photography.
You said compete. You said compete. Was there a time where I think I read this somewhere where you and a fellow barber, you guys would post your work up and play like
House of, or was it, what would he call it, that one? I remember this was back, it was like Game of Fades or something we called. And it was, you post one up and it was like a game of horse, and you would post one up and get the guy to see if he could mimic it or copy it. And then the guy would do a haircut and you'd have to copy it and post it. Yeah, that was fun. That was like really early on in the whole Instagram thing. I don't even know if we ever finished that game. I think we just got so distracted after the first two haircuts. We're like, he's good.
I think it's a good idea though, man. I think
maybe we should start that up.
That's pretty cool.
But that just shows your competitive spirit, because even then you're competing and you're not even it's not even for an award. It was just more of a bragging rights.
Exactly.
But the thing is, like, even awards are just bragging rights. I mean, everything that comes along. I mean, really, it is just for your own self. Like, if you're, I stopped competing a couple of years ago. Like, I stopped altogether. I had been up to that point regularly a finalist in things like Nahas and all that kind of, and it was great. It was really great. But I realized that that was awards and Instagram followers and things like that. They're not the end game. Like, people start treating these things like they're the finish line. You know what I mean? For the race, they're not the finish line. If anything, they're just a springboard in the middle of the race. You know what I mean? Like, it might get you a tiny bit further. It might get you an opportunity that you didn't have before. It might get you noticed by somebody that didn't notice you before, but that's not the end game. And people treat it like that's all you need to do. You've reached the top and here it is. That's just not true, man. It's a chance to use as an opportunity to get ahead. And I didn't want for myself to participate in a thing where I was standing in the way of somebody else getting their opportunity. And not to say that my work is so good that would happen. I just didn't want to even take the chance on that, because I think at one point I had a recognizable name. And I know a lot of these industry magazines and award shows like to try and keep recognizable names around, you know what I mean? To for whatever reason, do you know what I mean? And I just didn't want that to happen. So, and also, I didn't need those opportunities anymore. I've had more than my share of amazing opportunities in this industry. And if I haven't been able to make something of it to this point, then I don't deserve to. I've been handed so many incredible things, even just getting a chance to sit and talk to you guys. I mean, like, these are, it's more than I deserve. I'm blessed beyond measure. And I think at this point with me, I have my own brand. I've got my shops going and stuff. I'm working my ass off. I'm working so hard at this because I want to be worthy of all of those opportunities. But I want people to remember that, like, that's what those are. They're not the finish line. They're just a potential for a new opportunity. And you have to be willing to take those opportunities when they come along and recognize when it's an opportunity. You know what I mean? That's, I think, one of my biggest advice to people coming up in this industry, and I know I keep jumping ahead here, but one of my biggest pieces of advice growing up in this industry is understand what an opportunity looks like. Because a lot of people I see, like, I've handed out a lot of opportunities to people, and I'm constantly shocked by some of the surprise reactions that you get. One is like, is this an opportunity or is this somebody taking advantage? Understand that you have, if you want to get ahead in this industry, you are going to bust your ass for free a lot. You know what I mean? I still do. I still bust my ass for free. I still go and pay to go to some of these things that I'm at just because I want the opportunity to participate. And I think that's a really, really big thing in understanding what this end of things looks like is, use those things as opportunities, use them as springboards, but also understand when an opportunity comes your way and learn to jump on it.
That's incredible. I mean, and Matt, I'm also going to thank you very much for that, because I think, Tony and I, we kind of struggle with that a little bit too. Like, when does it pay off? Where does it pay off? And but keeping our eye on what opportunities can come from it. I kind of want to,
but staying humble and what's the bigger picture? And it's, go back to what he was talking about earlier, you know what I mean? Rather to inspire than impress, rather to teach or help others more so than trying to create a show or try to impress them in a certain way. And I mean, you're just listening to you speak right now, and you're so humble.
Mm-hmm.
It's really,
I'll tell you, it's easy to be humble when you're not as cool as everyone says you are.
Hey, that should be pretty humble.
But you know what? Here's the thing:
like a million T-shirts. I got to re-listen to this podcast and just with the
man. I'm gonna need royalties for those T-shirts. You know that.
Yeah.
He wants his royalties. Is that what he said?
You know what's interesting though is at the end of the day, like, I mean, I'm surrounded by great people that my friends back home, my clients at home, they don't really know a lot about what I do. You know what I mean? They don't know a lot about all the rest of this stuff because what do they care? I mean, when you have a client in your chair, it's about the person in your chair, not about you. And so the less they know about that, the better, I think. I mean, they see Instagram, some of them, and they see, they're like, oh, wow, you're really traveling around. I'm like, yeah, I get around a little. And but that's it. I mean, at the end of the day, this is currently a fascination, but really, I mean, we're just barbers. We are the most humble but noble, I think, job that there is. You know what I mean? And I think that's really important to keep your head on when it comes to that stuff. And it's easy to get outside of that stuff. It's easy to see all the excitement of it and the rock stardom and all that kind of stuff. But understanding that, man, I mean, it's a temporal thing. You know what I mean? Like, you got to try and keep your head on and keep your integrity throughout it, and don't waver from that. My grandfather was a great inspiration to me, and I mean, he was one of the people that really made me understand that integrity is a currency that you can't reclaim. You know what I mean? You spend it, but you can't reclaim it. And so it's an important thing to keep close. And so, I mean, he was actually one of the reasons why I started my barbershop in the first place.
Sounds like he's the reason why you have a fascination with World War II, because I'd imagine that he's about that age.
Yeah, he is. He didn't end up in the war. He was not serving, but he was a little young for that. But he was a really interesting guy. He grew up around that time. Yeah, and it's funny because when I stopped hairdressing, it was actually a bit of a slower progression than that. I had stopped teaching hairdressing very abruptly. So I stopped that very abruptly. There was one show that I did that I left the stage feeling sick to my stomach, and I was like, guys, I can't do this anymore. This is not what I want, and it's not what I really believe in. So I stopped doing that. Hairdressing is an interesting thing. My grandfather passed away, and a whole bunch of people showed up at his funeral I didn't know. They said really wonderful things about him. And the thing that struck me most was my dad. Actually, my dad got up and he read his eulogy. And he started with my grandpa's high school yearbook quote. Do you remember, like, in grade 12, did you guys get to do that? You like write a quote next to a picture of you kind of thing?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it's supposed to be something deep, like I think most kids today just write song lyrics or quotes from Gandhi or something like that. You know what I mean? As if it's 17 years old, you've earned some earthy wisdom to share with the ages, right? But my grandfather's changed my life. Like, I was at this point where I was feeling like, okay, this hairdressing thing is a little silly. Like the education end of it anyway, it just felt kind of showy and ridiculous. And I looked like, if truth be told, I looked like Rufio from the movie Hook, because that's just what male hairdressers looked like in the 90s. So it's just funny. I ended up getting to a point where I was listening to my dad's, I was listening to my dad deliver my grandfather's eulogy. He started with his high school yearbook quote that said this: "I will never let anyone be more of a gentleman than I." And that's all he wrote. And I don't know why, but it absolutely flattened me that at 17 years old, this man had the clarity to write something not only so succinct, but something that for the next 80 years of his life, he lived out, and that was incredible to me. And that showed incredible integrity. It showed incredible character. It made me really start thinking about, like, what the hell happened to guys? Like, what happened to guys that made us not that? When I started looking at the generation where he grew up and the way that they would take pride in their appearance, not because it was about ego for them, it was about showing. It was about showing the community, respect. Is personal respect and pride, and I saw all the guys walking out of the hair salons with the Moppy Bieber haircut or the faux hawk or something, the guy liner thing, and all this. I just started looking around at the overall style, and I was just like, what happened here? Where do we lose our dignity? Where do we lose our pride in men's grooming? There was this word that came out in a magazine right around that exact same time that was really popular. You probably remember this word. It was metrosexual. You remember that?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know a single guy that took that word as a compliment. I think in my estimation, and I'm a bit of an anthropologist when it comes to this stuff. So I teach a lot of classes about it, and I find this fascinating to talk about. But in my mind, at that point, it set off a situation that I commonly refer to as hypermasculinity, where at that point, there seemed to be this line drawn in the sand where you could either be real fancy and high maintenance, or you could be a complete dirtbag. And there didn't seem to be much middle ground, but somewhere in between those two things, I realized was this classic era of grooming, this gentleman, this pride in your appearance that still had a deep underpinning of masculinity. And what we had done in the salon industry, and I'll forward you guys some, like, a class that I taught on this, but it's basically the history of hairdressing and how barbering was thousands of years old before hairdressing basically absconded male clientele in about the 1960s, which was the first time the unisex hair salon even existed. Took most of the guys in, started giving them women's haircuts, and that's really easily provable. And not even necessarily women's haircuts, just haircuts that are based off of oval shapes that hairdressers had learned to cut at that point, not realizing that the bone structure between men and women is different. They did what they had to do. They did what they knew to do. Men started wearing these round women's haircuts for pretty much 45 to 50 years before anybody started seeing these old classic haircuts that look like my grandpa's again. And there's a reason why they look so strikingly different. It's because they're cut to suit a bone structure. And so what ended up happening was, basically, we took guys in, we permed, we frosted tips, we colored and bleached, and we plugged them in between services that we see as high ticket in the hair salon. We're taught to think that high ticket items are actually what make us money in the hair salon, right? We're doing the color work, the chemical work, and all that kind of stuff. If you really boil down the numbers on that, you're losing money on that stuff, and you are making money on men's haircuts because it costs almost nothing to provide. It's such a low overhead service, and they're super loyal, and they buy products and all these kinds of things. So we were kind of sold a bill of goods where it's like, oh, great, we do all the high ticket items, and then we cram them in between, because that's our 15-minute haircut that we know how to do. There was one haircut that every hairdresser knew how to do. About 10, 15 years ago, they had the men's haircut that they knew, right? It was short on the sides and just point cut the top across and mess it up with some products. I'll call it bedhead, and there you go. But the problem with that is that just became such a low standard of service for men that it was really quite easy for barbershops to step into a void. Because most of those guys grew up in a hair salon. They grew up going to that area because that's where the good haircuts came from. And going to a barbershop was about being cheap. I saw it as a completely different thing at that point. You know, I saw it as this opportunity to look and go like, look, my grandfather never came to the hair salon to get his hair cut by me ever. I did it a couple times at his house, but he never came to the hair salon because that's not where men went in his estimation. That's not what he grew up with. So when I had the barbershop open, he had passed away already, and I wanted to build very succinctly a place that not only would he have come, but he would have been deeply proud.
That's amazing.
I decorated the shelves. It was a brand new space that we took over. I took a house that had been torn down recently in Victoria. I contacted the guy. I bought all of the flooring. I bought the floor joists. I bought all the wood. So everything that went into this place was 100 years old already and had all this wear on it. The floor was all beat up. I started collecting Barber chairs from everywhere. I went on this pilgrimage, and I became obsessed with old Barber chairs. And I was picking these things up for like $200-300 at the time because people were just wanting to get rid of them. They were heavy and old, and kids had been drawn on them with crayon or whatever. And there's, you know, some guy had hopes of making a man cave, but then just sat in his garage for 8 years. You know, so basically I was buying all these things, and I was hauling them around, and I was collecting them, and it was like I was pulling them out of the dirt. You know, some of them were rusted and needed a lot of love, and so I had them refurbished, and all these old chairs that still had this feeling, this soul to it, you know. And all of the stuff that I found for the shop had come out of this reclamation yard, and it was these mirrors that they weren't even mirrors. They're actually windows from a hotel that had burned down. You know, the big window sashes that they used to have. Yeah, I found a whole bunch sitting in the mud with like all the original glass in the top. And so I pulled these things out. There were 6 of them, and I pulled them out of there, and I turned them into the mirrors that we used in the shop. You know, it still has the ledges and stuff. We sandblasted them. They look really cool. And then I found these old lockers that were rusted. And basically all of this stuff that was old and beat up and rusted and discarded. And I made it my goal to bring this stuff back to a point where somebody would look at it and go, man, that's beautiful. You know, it felt like a metaphor for what I really wanted to see happen in barbering. And at the time, there was nowhere to copy. There was nothing I could look at that was like, well, this shop has done this, and this shop is, and this is a cool technique for shelves or what. There's nothing. There was nothing to copy. There was one shop going on down in LA that I thought was doing something interesting, but it was a really different style than what I was going for. I wanted something to feel very much Canadian, not that retro Americana barbershop, hot rods, chrome and stuff. That wasn't me. I wanted something that felt a little more 1940s industrial, you know? And so, you know, you look on Pinterest, didn't exist at the time, like all that stuff.
Matt, I mean, I think this is maybe this is a good point to kind of jump in. Like I'm curious, even if you know, maybe you don't know, but you seem like you got a pretty good grip on like barbering history. But like it seems like what you were doing and what Rob and Lane were doing down in Shoreham, and there's a couple UK barbers as well. Like how did this timing all work out? It seems like you guys kind of started all at the same time, and kind of now the industry is being awarded from that, and then you know just the collective. Like, where did it come to a head?
Well, the interesting thing
how the hell did it happen?
A lot of us, you know, we get together. Like a lot of us are good friends. Rob is a really good friend of mine, and I actually agree with him. Barbering never went anywhere. You know what I mean? So
yeah, he yelled at me about that.
It never went anywhere. The thing is, different. Much like everything you were talking about earlier, there are different facets in barbering that are just as diverse as women's hairdressing. And that's the thing that I think is interesting. That one haircut that every hairdresser knew how to do is just not sufficient, because guys' hair is just as complicated as girls' hair. There's just as many variations and different types. You're going to get your Latino barbers, you're going to get your urban barbers, you're going to get your like what we call new market barbers, which is kind of where we fall into, you know, these like the new movement of barbering, which is this kind of more neo-traditional kind of style, you know what I mean, coming back. But then you're also going to have like your cheapo chop shops and stuff. There's always been that. What we've seen is a resurgence in new market barbers. So we've seen more of the I think, I don't want to say the word trend because I hate the word trend. I don't think that this is a trend. I think it's more of a movement. But I think the interesting thing is that we've seen more of the mainstream return to barbering. You know what I mean? And the idea that barbering can be seen as quality again, not just as, you know, cheap discount. But what happened there was interesting, because really early on when we started doing our thing, I was desperate to find anybody else that was doing this stuff because I felt like a weirdo. I remember the very first day, actually the night before we opened our first shop, like I became obsessed with this thing. Like it was crazy. I had this crazy obsession with barbering at that point. I couldn't explain it. And it was that thing that people thought would be weird. And I got so in debt. And my shop that I opened was the biggest shop I'd ever seen as a barber. It was 2,500 square feet, which is still by today's standards massive.
Wow.
It was crazy, man. And I remember getting so in debt and like to the point of where if this thing doesn't work out in the next 3 months, I'm going to go bankrupt.
Wow.
And the first day, I don't think I slept a wink before we opened our first day. And I remember the first day that we opened, there was me, 2 other guys that were barbering there with me. One of them actually was a guy I bought a chair off of, who I had convinced to come and work there. And he always says that I saved him because he was going to quit barbering if he didn't. And it was really interesting because the first day, the landlord of the building and like 8 of his family members showed up first thing in the morning. And that was enough to keep us busy until past noon. You know what I mean? And
Right.
and by the time that had happened, some people had started to trickle in because they wanted to have a look at the shop and all these things, and it just kind of caught really quickly. And it was just like by the end of the first day, I knew. I was like, oh my God, this is going to work. Like this is actually going to work. Just watching the way people were walking out. And I remember I wanted to stock the shelves with things that weren't just hair products. I took things that I thought were important pieces of masculinity history kind of thing. Like we had buck knives. We had like a little display of buck knives. Cause I mean, I see you guys both smiling. Cause like when you're a kid, like the day that you get your first buck knife, you feel like a man. You know what I mean? Like that's the first thing, that's the first little bit of power that you get as a kid, or responsibility kind of thing. And that feels really important. What was really cool is on that day, a guy walked in, he was a real older gent. He's a really nice, sweet man, but he looked at me and just smiled down. I was like, yeah, I really wanted to have some stuff in here beyond just that, a lot of men stuff. And he pulls out of his pocket the same knife that's sitting in the thing. And
Get out of here.
He had it for like 50 years. And I just about started to cry at that point. I was just like, oh my God. And he's like, I think you're doing something pretty amazing here. And to me, that was just that moment made all of the hours and money and everything. That one moment made it so worth it. Like I can't describe the feeling that I had when that happened. It was incredible.
Incredible.
And so beyond that, I was still really obsessed with collecting barber chairs and barber culture and all these things. And I was just absolutely immersed in it. And this is when I first started noticing other shops popping up in areas. One of the first ones I noticed was Scorum. I mean, they have such a distinct style. They're people I really resonated with as far as elements of design and what I wanted the shop to feel like. And I mean, Rob and Lane are just, they're rock stars in their own right. They're so funny, and they've got such personality. And Yella, who does all their imagery, is so talented at building brand. And I really admired the job that they were doing. It was really great. And when I got a chance to actually, we had interacted several times and knew of each other and then got to know each other. But the first time I actually really got to meet them, I was at a show in Orlando. And I came up. It was really funny. I was at this party where there's a bunch of hairdressers and people that I knew and stuff, and everybody was kind of meeting there beforehand to kind of meet and greet. And what was so funny was I saw them walk onto the balcony, and I remember thinking to myself, like, oh God, they're here. I'm kind of freaking out a little bit. I get that butterfly thing, like when you see a celebrity kind of thing. And I was like, holy shit. I'm like, okay, I gotta go say hi. And so I walk over and I tap Rob on the shoulder, and he turns around. He's like, holy shit, it's Matty Conrad. I just died. I died in that moment. And him and Lane are they're just the sweetest guys. Rob is one of the warmest guys. He has become one of my dearest friends. I really, really respect what they do. I absolutely think he's insanely talented beyond what most people assume. And he's one of the most genuine people I've ever met. And I really, really love that guy. So I'm really glad we met through that. Another shop that I started noticing at the time was a shop called Savills. And Savills is opened by a guy named Jock Davies, and he is incredibly talented guy as well. And he and I were so similar in style, and so there's a kindred spirit there, I think, with me and Jock. So much so that, again, the first time we met, within about 20 minutes, we knew we were pretty much brothers, and he's remained very close as well. He's a very, very good friend, and so. Seeing those two shops open in Europe, there was one shop that I knew of before that in New York that's not there anymore. But one of the shops, probably the shop that I found the most inspiration from really, really early on, was a place. It's become Fellow Barbers now, but originally it was a little place called Freeman's Sporting Goods. It was FSC, and it was one of the original kind of. I hate to use this word. I hate to use the word hipster, but it was a hipster barbershop. I mean, it was a cool thing, and I loved what they had done there. A friend of mine who's become a very good friend used to work there. His name is Mark Bustos. He was one of my very, very early inspirations. He has become one of my also best friends. He and I travel around a lot together now and work a lot together. But he was working at this shop, and so at that point, I noticed that there was starting to be a little bit more of a movement, and people started reaching out. We started getting written about in magazines, tons of shoots, like movies and stuff like that, wanted to come through and shoot in our shop. And then, all the magazines, the big magazines started taking notice, and we were written about in Details and Men's Health and GQ. And then one day, that was probably the most mind-blowing thing, is I was just building this brand in barbering and sharing it on Instagram, mostly because I was getting to know all these other barbers, and it became this cool community of like sharing with each other. And then one day GQ wrote this article, and it was about, these are the 5 coolest barbers you should be following on Instagram. And I have no idea how that happened, but they set my name at number 1. And I was like, that can't be right. Like, and I remember looking like, is there another Matty Conrad who's a barber? I started looking for it. And at that point I had like maybe 2,500 followers on Instagram, like nothing extraordinary, it was still, but I mean, to me that felt awesome. I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like people are into it.
My job is to research, do some research about you before we interview you. And I actually saw that article.
I saw
so
you.
I'm not full of shit.
Right. Yeah.
You were the one that found it. Thank God.
Yeah. But it would say, it had number 1, Matty Conrad, and then it'll say something. Then it goes, the man, which would be Matty Conrad. Then he would say his little piece, and then they would say something. Then they go to number 2, the man. But anyways, you were number 1. I did see.
It's crazy. Yeah, that really did blow my mind. And from there, it's holy God, like my phone caught fire that day. Let me tell you that much. It was like, it just didn't stop ringing away and vibrating. So that was really a bit of a starting point, a bit of a hinge point for me when things started to take off a little bit. And that's, I feel like I've just been playing catch up to that ever since,
Right.
Like I feel like I said, better opportunities than I ever deserved at this. And holy God, has it ever turned my life crazy, but I deeply love it. I love what I do. I always say the same thing though. Like I would love this, whether I was on stage in front of 2,000 people or cutting hair for one person. I feel that same sense of joy in what I do. I really have a job where I would do this work for free, and I'd love it, man. Like the other night, I'd like, my day off was yesterday, and I was like, I met this kid and I was like, I really want to cut your hair. Can we cut your hair and like take some pictures? And he's like, yeah, okay. Which is, by the way, a really weird thing to do. Like the guy doesn't know who you are and you just walk up and be like, hey, can I cut your hair and take some pictures of you? It's like, what the fuck is this guy's problem? Because it's weird, right? And I mean, I have a rule, like, and I know a lot of people don't agree with this, and everyone's free to do their own thing, but I don't take pictures of my clients. I post a lot of work. I post a lot of haircuts and stuff like that. And I know people, there's a lot of talk right now about like, well, you're always in the studio. How do you know these are really, I'm like, yeah, I only post those kinds of photographs because that's where I do most of the interesting work that I'm just excited about. Like behind a chair, I'm cutting hair for normal dudes. I cut hair, everyday haircuts like everyone else, but then when I want to get really creative, or if I want to have some fun, or if I just find somebody and I'm like, I kind of like your look, like, let's go take some pictures. Like, I don't do that to my clients. My clients aren't there to be my marketing. And I know everybody talks about, well, this is your billboard that walks around, and that's good. And that's fine. And they can tell people if they love their hair, but I don't like the way that Instagram is turning people into marketing opportunities for everyone. I feel like that's not the exchange that they signed up for. They came in to get a haircut, and yeah, it's sometimes some people, it makes them feel great. They're like, wow, you took a cool picture and I'm on your Instagram. That's cool. And that's great. But for me, that's never made me very comfortable. I feel like you're here for you. You're here for me to take care of you, for me to give you the best work that I can, for us to have a great chat, hang out. And I want you to walk out of here feeling cool and feeling better about yourself. But you didn't sign up here to be like, to spend an extra 10 minutes of me taking pictures of you in the back with a ring light and a bunch of other stuff and turning into my Instagram fodder. That's not what you signed up for. This is about you. And that is the opportunity where I take your experience and I turn it into something about me. And I try and avoid that. So for me, I like to, if I'm going to do a shoot for somebody, I don't charge them for the haircut. If it's somebody I've met, they come in for a haircut, I'm like, hey, tell you what, I'll give you the haircut for free if you come and do this for me. And then that's an exchange. We have like a deal. You know what I mean? They're like, I'll pay, you don't have to pay for this. If
that's the currency, right?
Yeah, it's a currency.
That's
and
cool.
So I find that's how I do things. And that's why most of my work looks the way it does, is just because I'm not shooting it behind my chair. And when people are talking to me about how do you build an Instagram, and I'm sure you probably learned this from Olivia in the class that you were talking about earlier. I mean, like, the way you build it is by understanding like what is going to stand out about your stuff. Like, I mean, there's just 8 million pictures of a perfectly blurry fade in a barber chair these days on Instagram, and they all look the same pretty much. They all look the same. What are you going to do different? What are you going to do that's unique? And when we were talking earlier about Anthony Muscola, one of the things, the greatest compliment I can get from anybody these days is when they look at my work, my photography work, and they look at it and they go, I knew it was yours before I saw the name. I think having a distinct style is very, very important. And
we've talked about that a bunch. We're friendly with like Presley. I think Presley very much has that like branding.
She's hilarious too. She's really
she's awesome. She's
I
such
love
a
her.
cool person. And Schmegs,
what a story!
First time that it dawned on me that she had a brand, right? Then I've gone back from that and I've go, oh, there are people that have brands. I mean, even she works with Be Seen. Even Be Seen has a brand on photography. But like I always knew when I was flipping through, even no matter how fast I was flipping through, I go, oh, that's a Schmegs image.
Yep. Yeah.
But then I even texted her. I said, Schmegs, you've done something amazing here. And let's be honest, she's had her license for 18 months, which blows me away.
A kid, like she is so talented at that age. It's like she is going to blow everyone away. Like, I really believe it. She's amazing at what she does.
She is, and I text her and I go, Megan, you've done something that few have done, and that's that your image is your brand. You always know that it's her thing. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't know if I've brought it up before, but I've been meaning to bring it up on the podcast. Just like how there's a few of these people that really have this brand, and it's their work, and she's definitely one of them. So Matt, when you started your barbershop, did you also start the Victory Barber brand as well?
Yeah, so we called it Victory Barber and Brand, and that was funny because I remember I was kind of working with the designer at first, but that relationship didn't really work out, and so I kind of had to just take it all on myself. And he was really advising against calling it that. He's like, no, that's a terrible name. But I was just like, I'm going to go with it. I like it. It speaks to me. And so I did it. And the reason we called it Victory Barber and Brand is I always intended to start a brand. I always intended for it to be more of a lifestyle component to it rather than just the barbershop. Because I really think that part of what I was trying to do is bring back that idea of that pride and dignity in men's grooming, being the counterpoint to that metrosexual, high maintenance shopping at the Le Chateau kind of thing, and it was like more this masculine.
You bring up Le Chateau.
I'm sorry.
Bring it all the way back to Le Chateau.
Well, yeah, I grew up in that era. I did. Yeah, I did. You know what? I did. The Le Chateau people can call me if there's a problem there. But here's going to get a letter in the mail, some sort of lawsuits about to happen for sure.
A cease and desist from a company that probably doesn't exist.
I don't even know if they do. But you know what I mean? It was this idea of like I wanted more than that. And I mean, part of opening a barbershop, and this was a very important part of it, is that my message has always been about authenticity and understanding that authenticity comes from a place of what is true. You can't fake it. You cannot fake something into being authentic. You can't facade and paint over it until it feels more authentic, because authentic isn't a feeling, it's a fact. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. It's truth. You can't create truth out of falsehood. So when I built the shop, it was about all of those things, but it was more about mastering the skills necessary to call yourself a barber. And that was really important. It wasn't just about doing men's haircuts. It was about learning all of the essential skills to being a proper barber. And that meant shaving faces. It meant working with a straight razor. It meant all of the things that a lot of hairdressers were very afraid of at the time. And learning to shave, let me tell you, was one of the most scary things I think I ever did, but one of the most rewarding too, because by the time I had mastered shaving someone's face, I knew that no barber from anywhere could walk in and call me out and say, well, you're just a hairdresser. No, I'm not. I have all of the necessary skills to do proper barbering. And I think that was really important, mastering the understanding of how to approach a haircut. It's not about how blurry your fade is. It's about whether or not you have a well-rounded ability to not just make a clean and functional service for yourself, but also to be able to understand how to build a men's haircut properly, how to shave faces, how to do all of the little things that barbers really do need to know how to do. And cleanliness above all. You know what I mean? That was the biggest thing. Understanding the difference between a hair salon and a barbershop when it comes to cleanliness and sanitization. You know what I mean? This is a big, big difference. And that was something we had to learn to master as well. So once we had done that, that was really where the skills started to build, you know, a lot of experience. If you want to get great at barbering, practice, you know, do it a lot and you'll get better at anything. By the time we had logged, 10,000 hours, we'd become experts, and we became experts very quickly because to that point, shaving in a shop was not particularly popular. One of the reasons why we wanted to do it in our shop was not only did it give it legitimacy, but also it was an art that was in very real fear of dying out. We were very close to losing shaving altogether. A generation of guys that didn't do it for the last 30, 40 years because they'll tell you it's because of sanitizations, because of AIDS, because of whatever else, bloodborne illness. The truth is they just didn't want to do them because they didn't make as much money doing that. And
Right.
Everything about barbering during that period became about competing on price and about getting cheap, in and out quick. A shave is not a quick in and out service. It's just not. It requires preparation, or requires cleanliness, requires all these different things that most barbers just got too lazy to actually provide. And so I went around to a bunch of shops asking for shaves. I remember one time I got done with like a Bic razor and a can of Barbasol foam. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding. This is what had come of that crap. That
Wait a second. It was literally a Bic. You didn't even get like a Mach,
it was
a Mach 3 or anything.
No, man. Do you know how much those blades cost?
Yeah, no doubt.
Oh my God. That's another story. But it was interesting though, because that's what had come of this incredible skill set. And I think that is the heart of the craft of barbering is learning how to master a straight blade. That is really its heart. Largely because at the turn of the century, that's what barbershops were. They were a shave shop, more than anything. And home shaving didn't really come around until about 1914 when it got more popular during World War II. When the Gillette company launched their safety razors. Up to that point there was, but barbering was still very much the core shaving was very much the core of barbering. So I thought that was really important to keep alive. And we had done that. And then when things started to kind of boom and explode, man, we started doing a lot more shaves than the guy that taught us how to shave. We had hired an old master barber to come in and teach us the steps and teach us how to do it and really work with us. And then it was just practice. And very quickly on, we had done more shaves in the first 3 months of being open than he had done in his whole life. And so it was really reemerging as a bit of a booming. What was an oddity, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of people had always wanted to do that. It makes you feel like a cowboy, or like a mob boss or something. It's like it's a nice service to have done. It's like getting a facial for a man, but with an element of danger that keeps it really masculine.
I want to do it really bad. I just don't want to shave.
I know, man. I feel you. I realize the irony that I am like a men's grooming expert, but I look like a homeless man. I realize that there's. That irony is not lost on me at all. It's a thing.
That is awesome, man. What a transition from where you started to where you are now, and that's amazing.
It is pretty cool.
But the thing is like it was the feeling of pride that I was trying to restore to it, but it was really what was just being restored in me. It was that feeling of pride in what I was doing, and that feeling that it wasn't trading my time for money anymore. It was that feeling that I was doing something purposeful, worthwhile with my life that made me proud to go to work every day. It made me proud to do the job. It made me proud to learn about it and try to keep those traditions alive. And to see where barbering has come now, Rob and Joth and I mean, we're friends. We get together regularly. we still talk about this stuff and think like, none of us had any idea that it was going to turn into this. Like none of us could have imagined that it would blow up the way that it has.
Do you have a certain mantra that you kind of live by, or that you, that you like?
Honestly, on any given day, that can be a different thing. Like, I think my life is very complicated in that I do a lot of different things. Like I say, when I'm teaching classes, which has become like a huge component of my life at this point, a lot of travel and a lot of teaching, it really is that I want to leave people inspired rather than impressed. You know, I don't let people's opinions of my work or opinions of my haircut, when I post it on Instagram, I don't let that derail me in any way, because that's not really my purpose here anymore, you know, is to impress these people. My purpose that I have is to go out and to help people be less afraid of it. The people that need it. And the massive amount of response from that is it keeps me on the road almost every weekend of the year. You know, last year, like I said, I was only able to go to about half of the places that requested me last year. And so I know there's need for it. And so for me, that's just a big one. And I think moving forward into this year, it's really more of the same of that. Hopefully. I mean, we're working very hard with our brand right now. I built a brand, where we actually launched a styling range, which took a long time for me to finally get off my ass and do, but it had been I like to say it was like years of preparation so that I could launch exactly what I wanted, you know, and now I've got some products that we've launched that are doing really well. And of course the aprons, we were talking about the aprons earlier.
Right.
I don't know how that happened, man. Like the aprons became this thing that was like, somebody had asked like, oh, you're doing this show, do you have any products to sell? And at the time, everybody was asking about our aprons that we wore, and I had a couple made, and then I liked them, but I wanted to change a bunch of stuff about them. And so I just like was like, you know what? I'll make some aprons. We'll bring some aprons. So I took some aprons and I totally changed them up and made them functional for what I thought I needed for barbering, and then just more comfortable and just more style that I like. And then we released those, and those things just went bananas. Like people now, they're like the thing that everybody's like, oh, you have the apron. And I'm like, our apron is now the apron. And I'm like,
so we're talking about the brand and all this and your aprons and everything. So how can our listeners, you know, find you, follow you, meet you?
Oh yeah. I love meeting people. Okay. So I'm going to be at lots of shows coming up. The next show that I'm going to be at is going to be in Long Beach, California at the ISSEE show. I'll also be in the DC area for the BTC show this year. I'll be at the IBS in New York. And I will be at a myriad of other classes and shows. If you're listening from over in the UK, we're going to be coming out your way in March. There'll definitely be some classes, some announcements. I'm working right now really hard on some education, an education platform for myself, just mattyconrad.com, that I'm going to be launching, and really some in-depth education with that design of like, here's how to do it step by step, no tricks. And a lot of them are videos that I've done from some of my most iconic photos, like the ones that most people recognize, or certainly the most popular ones. I took those haircuts and that I did. I actually filmed those while I was doing them, and now I have step by step on exactly how to recreate those, as well as like really in depth on the skill set and stuff. So I'm working on that really hard. I'm in my studio a lot filming right now, trying to create stuff. The editing process takes forever, but I'll get it, I promise. You can find all of our products available at www.victorybarber.com. That is our product page, and you'll also be able to find our barbershops at www.victorybarbers.com. So yeah, you'll be able to find all that stuff there, and we will be able to keep you up to date with all the education that's coming to your area this year.
Awesome. Matty, dude, first off, I think I'm going to commit you to part 2 because I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, but I think that there's so much more that we can talk about. I think that we kind of like grazed on a lot of stuff, and I let Matty go, but I definitely want to get more in depth in some of the points that he was making. Matty, yeah. So again, I'm going to commit you to number 2, and hopefully it won't take 100 months to do it. But
I would love that. Maybe we can do that in Orlando if we're both there.
That's a great idea. We're sitting in, well, we won't let any secrets out yet, but
sure.
Man, we would love to do that. Dude, I think at this point we just let you go, and we try to make some time. I would love to do it live too, actually.
It'll be fun. Well, okay, we have to do that, but if we do that, we gotta have a drink in front of us while we're doing this. We gotta be able to cheers each other once or twice.
Deal.
Yep.
We'll make a drinking contest out of it if you guys are down. every time we write a T-shirt, we have a drink.
You got to toast one off, right?
Yep.
That's awesome.
Man. I had so much fun today, guys. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. It was
Much
awesome.
love, brothers. Much love.
Mr. Matty Conrad of Victory Barber and Brands, thank you very much for joining us on your day off.
Pleased to meet you.
Hey, so there it is. Hey, this is a message that we've been trying to bring, I don't know, for the last couple of months, actually since we started the podcast. Hey, so if you like the podcast or if you find that it's useful, please leave us a review, a 5-star review on iTunes. Leave us a rating and a review.
But if you don't like it, forget about it.
Yeah, totally forget about this message. We also want to thank Sarah and Blaine from Pretty Gritty. Sarah and Blaine, they are a band out of Portland, Oregon, and we just want to thank them very much for allowing us to use their song, Pleased to Meet You, on our podcast. That's cool. I think you can find their music on iTunes.
Peace and hair grease.